Becoming comfortable with who you really are. Peeling off the layers and finding a life more authentic to who you truly are. Finding more success and fulfillment by just being real with those we both love and work with. Starting with ourselves. This is prosperity and something greater. My guest today is Rod Haenke. He's a senior consultant for Instructional Designs Incorporated, and as such, he's a go-to charter school consultant in the areas of accountability systems, governance, curriculum and instructional practices, teacher evaluation systems, and professional development. Rod's been a classroom teacher, a school principal, a national trainer and presenter, and as a charter school founder and leader, he is the experience developing instructional software and online curriculum featuring live expeditions, including the International Greenland Expedition. That's how I met Rod. He's done some really cool, very fun things in education. And when I first met him, he was working with the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium on their MayaQuest program. And you'll hear us talk about his involvement in their iconic Oregon Trail computer program that so many people of a certain age loved using in school. This was early and very fun educational computing. I've personally learned so much from Rod about instructional design, which in my limited understanding is just trying to create educational programs and materials that actually help people learn. It turns out this is kind of hard to do well. And Rod's an expert. He's also someone who has learned as much about prosperity as anyone I know. So here now, my friend, Rod Haenke. Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody to today's podcast. This is Rem Jackson, and with me is a very, very good friend of mine. I've already told you a bit about how I met Rod and how we worked together and how much I have personally learned from Rod, especially about trying to design anything that you're trying to convey, whether I'm coaching people or trying to teach some of these things in a way that they can more easily apprehend it and understand it. So anything I know about instructional design, I learned from you, Rod. So thank you so much. And I'm well aware I know just a little bit. Anyway, welcome, my friend. It's good to catch up with you.
It's always good to spend time with you, Rem. Absolutely.
Well, and we're almost neighbors. So
yes,
Rod's moved from beautiful Minneapolis, Minnesota, all the way down to actually St. Paul, I think is where you're at now, right?
Well, I'm actually in the Minneapolis suburbs.
You're back. Okay.
Hoping things will stay calm.
Exactly. But spending quite a bit of your time and moving eventually down to Palm Springs. So,
correct.
Like I said, we can practically throw a stone and hit each other if we throw really hard. So
that's right.
Anyway, Rod, welcome. So let's just jump into it. Let me ask you this question. How would you define prosperity for you?
Well, I thought about that question, and I think what just came to mind right away was to live the life you were meant to live, which I think is, I think there's a lot of philosophy in that statement and maybe some belief systems that I'm not even sure I agree with, honestly. I'm not sure, you're put on this planet and you have a pre-designed life you're supposed to live. So I'm not even sure I believe that really, but I do think there is, in this journey that we're both well into, that you learn over time that it's, in some ways, it's just it's a peeling back of who you are, and it's I think maybe for some people, they peel back a lot of who they are when they're younger and they live this more truer life to who they are, from their 20s on or whatever. And I think probably we all do that to some extent. But I think for me, I had definite milestones or times in my life where there was more peeling back, and maybe it was even more raw. But as painful as some of that was at times, I think I came through it kind of being more comfortable in my own skin. I guess that's the only way I could put it. And the more comfortable you are in your own skin, the more successful or the more real you are with people around you. And if you're real with people around you, I think they just react better, and you eventually can become more effective. I think I was effective earlier in my career, but I think in the last 10 years, since I feel like I've become more authentically who I am and more comfortable in my own skin, I think I've been more effective. So, and I think more importantly, just kind of happy in life. And so if prosperity is just simply being who you are and being comfortable with that, then I guess I'm prosperous.
Well, I think that's actually a kind of a profound way to answer that question. And truly, one of the reasons I asked you to be a guest on my podcast, because I've been your friend for a very long time. You know, we met really professionally. We've been friends for so long, and I've been along for the ride on much of that journey. And I see all of that. And you know, I think, of course, what you said, everyone's on that journey, right? I mean, that's almost like it's sort of a universally, that's what we're doing here almost. But we struggle with it so much. And even I know so many young people now that you see it happening, and and you know when they're lining it up and when they're not. And and again, as people of a certain age as you and I are, you also work very hard to let people have that journey themselves and not say, "Oh, I know what you're going through," because you know, from a very different generational experience. We're all really in this together. But so let's talk about that. So, what were really the defining moments or events that brought you to your career path? What's your story so people can learn more about you?
Well, kind of more to the point version of that story is, I think maybe like 3 to 4 key events. I think number one, I grew up on a potato farm in northern Minnesota, where there actually are not a lot of farms. There's farms in southern Minnesota, but northern Minnesota is not really farm country. But my great-grandfather carved out a potato farm in the rocky soil and the pine trees in northern Minnesota. Lucky me. All these beautiful lakes. But my ancestors, they didn't like to hunt, they didn't like to fish, they liked to potato farm. So I got the wonderful experience of growing up on a potato farm, and I hated every minute of it. But fortunately, moved to the big city of Virginia, Minnesota, from the little town of Boabic, Minnesota, all of about 15 miles away. But in that, even though that was a difficult time to move in high school, but part of my transition was a family friend got me involved in coaching elementary basketball. And I had barely played basketball myself. I hardly knew anything about it, really. But then all of a sudden I started coaching elementary basketball to 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grades. Just 6th grade boys. Well, what do you know? I ended up becoming the most successful elementary basketball coach in the history of Virginia, Minnesota. We won championships almost every year, and we were just this little Catholic school. We were like the little sisters of the poor, basically, with all these big public school kids. I learned some things. I actually learned the game of basketball, and without going in too much more detail, it's just basically it's one thing. Basketball is cause and effect. That's what it is. And I learned that. And I learned that with these elementary boys. I learned that if you do this, the other defensive player is probably going to do that. So then you can do this instead. That's what basketball is. And these elementary boys learned that with me. So we were just ahead of the other kids. We just knew what they were going to do, and we always were always 1 or 2 steps ahead of them. And I just thoroughly loved doing that. It was really again, because it was a difficult transition of my life, moving at that time, but it was really my saving grace. I loved every minute of it. And that led me to go into teaching. And although a funny thing is that I never had that same experience as a teacher. never came close. That elementary basketball period with those elementary boys was by far my peak career experience. And I would say still to this day, because it was just like totally engaging all the time. It was just, I just loved it. And then, of course, it had like mentoring aspects to it and had like, we're all together with something. So it just had so many wonderful aspects to it. But like teaching never became that way because in schools, it's not like when you're teaching social studies, science, reading, math, so forth. It's not exactly the same as, scoring that layup when you shouldn't have, or, the excitement that comes from like sports. So it was never quite like that. But I still liked it. I still like teaching. I love the kids. And I also kind of came to a philosophy about teaching during my 8 years of teaching that really was only about one thing, and that was about engaging kids. That was kind of like the cause effect, like with the basketball. I noticed that if you engage kids, they'll learn. So like when you talk about instructional design, that to me has always been the centerpiece of instructional design is engaging. You don't always succeed. There's a lot of lessons that were not very engaging, but that was always my goal because I noticed if you engaged them, they would learn. And then I carried that through with me to MEC, as you know. That's when we met back in the day when I was doing instructional design software for Minnesota Educational Computer Company, the Oregon Trail company, as some people may recognize. And I worked some on that team and then with several other 5 or 6 other educational games, if you will, that I designed. And then the last one being MayaQuest, which you're very familiar with too. Kind of brought the internet. So I was actually getting involved in adventure-based learning in the mid-90s, already getting online, internet-based adventures, worked with people who went to the North Pole, bicycled across Africa, sailboats around the world. It was really neat to work with a lot of those people. But it was a time where the internet was still pretty young. Schools really weren't using it that much. And so it kind of dried up, frankly. And that shifted me to working with schools and primarily charter schools. For almost the last 20 years, I've been mostly working with charter schools on curriculum improvement, teacher improvement, governance improvement, all kinds of aspects of running a successful charter school. But I will say I'm back into adventure learning. I don't think I've told you this, Rem. But Lonnie Dupree, who is one of the Arctic explorers I worked with, he's going back to Greenland to this next year to discover the impact of climate change on Greenland. And so we're back doing an adventure-based curriculum on that expedition. So I'm kind of excited about that.
Oh, that's fun. That is really fun. And those were exciting times. I mean, Rod and I met when I was working with a company called Classroom Connect, and we became engaged with you and on the quests. And I remember learning outfitters and running the Nile and all of the things that you guys were doing. And it was just so, engaging, really interesting and engaging. And there are people listening right now, Rod, who grew up with the Oregon Trail. And in fact, Rod told me that if you had the CD-ROM version of that, if you remember what those are, his daughter Brianna is she's the prairie girl on the CD-ROM of that. So wow, that's just, talk about fun. And now that you're kind of bringing it all full circle,
right?
And I know you've worked with him before, so that's exciting,
right?
I would like to get an update on that whenever that happens. We'll let everybody know.
Yep.
Okay, so we all have challenges. We all have obstacles that face us. Can you share, what do you deal with on your daily journey? What can trip you up?
Well, and Rem, I don't think I probably ever talked to you about this as much because usually we're socializing, more focused on having fun. But when there's things that you have either helped me through or things that you've said over the years that have really stuck with me. And I probably haven't told you that often enough. But I remember and it kind of leads to like some of the stuff that I'm reading right now and kind of the focus. I'm also in a Harvard leadership program right now, although I'm on a little bit of a break. But the one issue that has come up in my work that has been very surprising to me I always thought it would be about curriculum or instruction or educational philosophy. I mean, that's really the area that I've worked in. But it's really communication. Communication has both been probably my biggest barrier just for myself as a professional. And it's what I see all the time. It's really the challenges that I have and other people have with how to communicate. And it happens all the time. It happens in profound ways. I think because I've been a little bit of a student of it myself, I've gotten better at it. I'm not perfect, but it's funny. That's what my profession has become. It's really been more about communication. Like the leaders I work with, you have to have some domain knowledge about what they're talking about. But at the end of the day, it's really about how it's communicated. I can get to some specific examples of that, but I remember Rem, you used to talk about I think it was sales techniques. And I think you called one was the pendulum. Do you remember telling me about the pendulum technique and how to use that in professional situations?
I absolutely do. It's called the pendulum theory. It was developed by David Sandler. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want me to define it, or you
can? You know more about it than I do, but I can tell you that I've used it. Go ahead.
Well, okay. So it's a very simple concept, but it's really, really powerful. And especially if you're in communication and you're trying to, for lack of a better term, sell your point, sell your product or your service, make your point. When you're speaking to someone, you should imagine a pendulum, and it's on a clock. All right. So, 12 at the top, 6 at the bottom, and a pendulum hangs from the middle down to the bottom. And it's generally in motion. That person is swinging back and forth. They could swing all the way up to 3 o'clock, all the way over to 9 o'clock. And if they're at 3 o'clock, it would be a person who is extremely positive and really with you. They're like, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. This is so exciting. This is wonderful. Right. A person at 9 o'clock is like, this is the dumbest thing I ever heard. We should probably just get off the phone now. I don't like you. So those are really kind of the extremes of it. Right. Most people, you probably never meet anybody that's really there. But here's the interesting thing. And there's one other position that I want to discuss real quickly, and it's 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock is neutral. That is the one, if you're in a situation with someone and they're just not engaged at all. That's actually the one where you're less likely to have a successful outcome because they're not even really trying. Right. So somebody will be anywhere from, they might be at 4 o'clock, they might be at 5 o'clock, they might be at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. And you have to decide where on this pendulum they are. And that can help you. Do you want me to explain the move where you position yourself, or do you want to do that, Rod?
No, you go.
Okay. So let's say, for instance, somebody's at 4 o'clock. That'd be a very, very positive person. I mean, they're like, this is really great. How do I sign up or whatever?
Yeah.
Well, most times a salesperson be like, oh, that's really super. So, okay, here you go. And maybe you won't do many of the things that you need to uncover and find out because we're already done with this person.
Right.
What you don't know is if a person's at 4 o'clock, they're very quickly headed way back over. That pendulum's always swinging. So if they're positive now, they're going to be negative later. If they're negative now, they'll be positive later. They're going back and forth.
Right.
You have to modulate your own behavior. And so if you're at 4 o'clock, I'm going to go to 5 o'clock. And I would say, well, that's really great. Why are you so excited about that? I mean, there's probably some things we really should discuss.
Right.
Now, let's say somebody's at 7 o'clock and they're pretty negative, which by the way is wonderful because it means they're asking questions. They're trying to figure you out.
Right.
Are you the right solution for me or not the right? So I would position myself at 8 o'clock and say, well, this is very possibly not going to work for you. And when that happens, then they're like, well, what do you mean by that? And they're going to pull me back over.
Right.
And the last part of that is you also have to simply believe in if you have a solution or a product or a service and you really believe it's right for them, your goal was just to help them discover that for themselves. But ultimately, help them make the best decision for them, not necessarily say yes to what you're doing, but make the right choice.
Right.
But if you believe you're going to help them, then you got to kind of hope that that's it. That's the pendulum theory by David Sandler.
Yeah, I think ever since you introduced me to that, I probably have interacted with that technique probably, I don't know, 100 times probably over the course of the
Yeah.
last 15 years probably. It comes up. I think there's different angles to it too, but I think it's really part of this broader area that I've really been engaged in, which is, I would call it framing. So it's, sometimes I'll just tell people that's what I do for a living. I frame, not like picture frame with a hammer and nails, but really frame questions, frame issues. I'm working with my client and they have, they might just blurt out that they're having this problem with this teacher or this board member or something. And it's really going back to them and helping them, again, and I don't really have a guidebook for this. It's really been kind of like a combination of self-taught and picking up from things here and there. I think there's probably even an opportunity for someone to write a book about how to frame things for educational leaders, because it happens all the time. And it ends up being like the most disastrous thing that people do sometimes, write an email that's not very well thought out and that's not framed correctly or framed positively. And then they end up causing way more problems than their initial.
Email was invented by Satan.
Yeah.
No, exactly. I do believe that. It is. Yeah. It is the worst possible form of communication, other than what time's the meeting? 7:00. Where is it?
Exactly.
Main Street. Right. After that, you have a subtle thing or even a little bit of a discussion. Never, ever, ever use email.
Right. And I think one of maybe the unintended consequences email and social media and so forth have had on us is it's resulted in low attention spans. And so the other part of framing that I work with a lot, just again for myself and kind of work with some of the leaders that I work with, is on really creating more concise, clear, and positive messages. Not Pollyannish positive, but positive in a way that you're framing the issue or the concern or the action that you want to take place in a way where it invites people's, cooperation, input at the right level, but not intended to, or certainly you don't want to get people ticked off, or you don't want to have people, push too far on the pendulum themselves. You want them to be able to take the information and say, oh yeah, does that make sense? And get them to think about it, but not react emotionally to it. I just do that all the time. I help leaders rewrite emails. We talk about just in meetings. It's really tricky because, I'll be in a leadership group meeting and somebody who's just really horrible at framing, we'll talk about a situation, and this really a good person, really a smart person, and yet always, generally talks about problems or issues or concerns in a way that you end up going down 7 turns the wrong way because of everything they said to set up the problem, rather than just simply stating the problem and maybe inviting a solution. It's like, well, the kids aren't following the rules, and then the paraprofessional's not helping enough, and then we had a meeting about it, and then it didn't work, and then the parents are called the parents. It's like one thing after another to set up the problem. Everyone kind of knows the problem, okay? Kids don't always behave that well. We kind of know what the problem is, but can we offer, can we concisely state what the problem is, and then invite everyone to get involved in a solution? There's just an art. I think there's a science and an art to framing those kinds of conversations. And again, I have not seen the guidebook yet on exactly how to do that. So it's like back to I know your last question is about what books you're reading. And I actually haven't, I've been searching for a really good book on this and I haven't found it yet, but I found some. But so I, go on the internet a lot and just look for how to frame conversations with leaders. And so I'm hoping maybe even you might know of some other books or resources for that.
I've got a couple. One of them I'll how to have difficult conversations, I think is the name of one of them. I'll look into that, and if I can get the author, I'll make sure I tell you, and I'll tell everybody on this podcast, we always include the books. One that we're studying right now in my top practices group with my doctors. I mean, this is all the time, Rod. I mean, you're doing with educators. I'm doing with doctors, with their associate doctors, with their partners, with their office managers, their medical assistants. It's a universal issue. We're studying a book called Leadership is Language by Captain David Marquet.
Oh,
that's a very good book. And it does have, I think you'd enjoy it a lot. Because, one of the things he says is, when you're trying to lead people in a way that it's called intent-based leadership. You don't empower people, you emancipate them. I mean, you actually give up control because you've done it well. And one thing we'll do is we'll anchor the conversation. We'll be like, okay, well, we probably should think about doing something like this. What do you think? And now, boom, everybody knows what the leader thinks. Now we're going to position ourselves around that instead of not even starting there. So you would like that, I think.
Yeah.
One last thought on that. One other strategy in that frame that I often share with my doctors is this idea. So if you and I need to have a discussion, or a group, we need to have a discussion. Instead of mentally seeing like right now, I'm sitting on this side of the desk, you're sitting on that side of the desk. And let's say that I think that your behavior, what you're doing is the problem. Okay. And I got to figure out a way to fix you. That's, let's just say that's what I'm actually dealing with here. Better for you, instead of thinking about looking across the table at Rod to try to have this conversation with Rod, we mentally at least see yourselves sitting beside each other. Your shoulders are beside each other and you're looking up at the problem. The problem's up on the whiteboard. So, and here's the problem. What do you think? And then, it just that little thought can be so helpful in how they position everything. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. But
that's another good one. That's another good one. Like I said, I think there's room for a new book, Rem, about leadership communication skills. Mm-hmm.
We should collaborate. So there you go. Listen, I'm going to jump us along here if that's okay.
Yep.
So what's the top strategy you use just to keep yourself heading in the right direction and not slip back into the old habits like we so often do?
Yeah. Well, I think the two things I was thinking about was it's kind of odd that one of the techniques that has always worked for me has been to slow down and just kind of let the universe flow. So especially if I'm like having a big problem or a big challenge. So my tendency is to want to go in and control and manipulate the outcome. That's my tendency to do that, whether it's a professional challenge or a personal challenge. That's my tendency. And so I've noticed when I just kind of stop and just kind of let it kind of happen, a lot of times it gets resolved without me actually doing anything. Like just of course, that can't work for every problem, but I can't tell you how many times were major challenges I've had where that technique has worked well. But there's something that has to be combined with that. And I think that's as obvious as it sounds, is honesty. So it's like being honest with, obviously, as you know, the biggest challenge of my life was coming out gay 10 years ago. And after having raised a family and being married for 26 years. And so like doing nothing wasn't really the answer. Although I would say when I was doing the opposite, that was the problem. When I was towards the end of that time period, I was doing a lot of like trying to control outcomes, And my marriage was actually a relatively happy marriage, actually. And so I was trying to figure out how can I, basically address this issue in a way where I can control the outcome. Well, I couldn't control the outcome. But I mean, for like a year and a half, while I was really immersed in this, that was my biggest challenge. I was trying to control the outcome and I couldn't. And so at the end of the day, it just ended up being, through some support and stuff that I came to the realization I just had to be honest, and give it some space and just let it happen. And so I think that's happened in probably the most challenging issue of my life. But I would say in minor little challenges with work colleagues or work situations, the same thing has. And I think maybe going through that personal experience has helped me in professional life do this, kind of use that same technique of just honesty combined with letting go of the outcome and just kind of letting the universe happen. and see what happens. The more I try to control, it seems to mess it up.
I can relate to that. I mean, I really can relate to that. And it's interesting for me. That is very often the path that I've had to really learn is just better. It's not my natural set either. I can be very directive. I can be very, authoritative about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes every last bit of maturity and wisdom in me to allow things to move forward in that kind of a way. But it's just always better. A friend of mine, Jay Henderson, said one time, and he's not the first person to say this, but it's the one that stuck with me, is always take the high road. And I realized that when you always take the high road, it's the most selfish thing I've ever done, because it's always better. It's just always better if you allow room and space for people. But like you said, engaging and framing it while you're at it, you're active in that process. You're not passive either. You're trying to help it.
Right.
So Rod, I want to jump along. The people listening to this podcast they're interested in achieving really their own version of prosperity. So hearkening back a little bit to, where we started this, what advice would you share for folks?
I think kind of back to what I was just saying. It's kind of like knowing what you can control and knowing what you can just be honest about and let go of. I mean, it still seems to come back to that for me. Is, again, for whatever work you do, you have to have domain knowledge or, expertise in your field. But I think none of that expertise or not as much of that expertise will come forward if you're not sharing who you are as a real person, honestly. And I've learned that, are you familiar with the book Nonviolent Communication?
No.
Okay.
But I will be now. Okay.
But it's really some of this really basic communication stuff. It's just this ability to be able to, especially in Minnesota, we're Minnesota nice, so it's hard for us to really share our true feelings about things without thinking that we're coming across negative, or we're just very conscious about how other people perceive us. And so it's learning these basic techniques of being able to say, or one of the most important, I think, communication messages they talk about in that book is just being able to say, I feel this because this, just like these little sentence frames of just, again, they sound so basic and simple, but it's like, I don't know how many times when I don't naturally do that. I've had to self-teach myself to use those basic sentence frames. But every time I use it, it works. If I own my feelings, then I'm not attacking somebody else, or I'm not controlling somebody else. I'm just saying, I feel frustrated that, I'm not able to get this project done as quickly as I'd like to, rather than saying, you're getting me behind. It's just so easy to jump to that. It's like your old brain or whatever just jumps to that more, reactionary. But it's like stepping back, I feel frustrated, or I feel not heard, or, just owning it. And those feelings come from my childhood. They come from, they're not because of this person in this very instant. It's because it's me. So those are my feelings. And then again, like, how can we work on this, or how can we make it better, or how can we, just inviting the other person into the process of, like you said, just like that technique you just said about the side by side, and there's the problem up there. I've never looked at it quite that way, but I think that's a good technique to go along with the ownership of your feelings.
I think it really, really helped. That one I think is my own, actually, and I've used that over and over again. And it diffuses so much, and it frames things the right way.
Right.
So Rod, here's my fun question. If you were a toy, any toy at all, what toy would you be and why?
I guess the one that pops to mind is something like Thomas the Train. Thomas, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Of course I do.
Yeah. So it was my granddaughter's.
I like him very much. Yeah, I like Thomas.
So I think I got reacquainted with Thomas through my 7-year-old granddaughter, who was her favorite toy. I'm not sure it is anymore. I know it was a couple years ago. And so I think that whole image of that smiley face and that, always moving forward and positive outlook, I think that's probably I relate to a lot. And then I think if I could add one more, I would say, did you like Winnie the Pooh when you were a kid?
Of course.
I think
I liked him when I was a kid, and I adore him now.
I remember probably that same time I was living on the farm, not enjoying potato farming and kind of that harder kind of life, even as we started working on the farm with 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. And so, we had to go out to the warehouse. We had to go to the potato field. We had, there's a lot of this. It was kind of a hard, not like Depression era hard, but it was just for a little gay kid on the Iron Range of Minnesota. It wasn't what I wanted to be doing. I wanted to be in town, playing with the other kids and riding the bikes down the street and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, Winnie the Pooh just kind of I remember when that came on, it was like, oh, look at that. Christopher, Robin, and Winnie the Pooh is just also light and sweet. And it showed me, oh, there's actually sweetness, and people can be sweet to each other and kind. And so I think that kind of stood out for me as well.
Well, that's great. No, and there have been some wonderful, like The Tao of Pooh is a wonderful book that talks about really philosophy behind all of it, and it's wonderful stuff. So, well, that's great. And last question, can you recommend a good book that you think we would maybe you can share with us that we could read?
Well, I've talked about a couple. I think, again, if anybody's not familiar with nonviolent communication, it's been around a long time. I think it's Marshall Herskovitz, I think is the name of the author. And he actually, there's YouTube videos as well of some of these techniques, but that's just really, really good. I don't like the name nonviolent because it sounds violent, but it's really just effective communication techniques. So I think that's really good. I'm just starting The Power of Framing by Gail Furhurst, which is kind of because like I said, I've been looking for a toolkit kind of for framing since it's what I do so much. But again, it's been a challenge, so there might be an opportunity for someone else to write that book. And then just for something fun, and if you want to get into the head of a catty, fun, gay mind, Gary Janetti, was one of the writers of Will and Grace. He's got a book called Do You Mind If I Cancel Things That Still Annoy Me? It's quite funny. So if you're just looking for something enjoyable, enjoyed that a lot.
Oh, that's great. Well, Rod, I can't tell you how great this has been. You're in Minnesota right now, but you'll be coming back down to the desert. And now that I think you're vaccinated and we're vaccinated, right, we'll have you and Jim over and we'll have a little more of that good red wine, which we're used to doing, and enjoy each other's company and maybe even catch a show if we do it in the fall. So that would be fun.
Exactly.
That was, we had a good time before. So, well, Rod, thanks so much for spending the time with us. I really appreciate it, buddy.
And thank you, Rem.
All right. See you later, everybody. Becoming comfortable with who you really are. Peeling off the layers and living a life more authentic to who you truly are. And finding more success and fulfillment by just being real with those we love and those we work with. Really understanding that effectively communicating has as much, if not more, to do with your success in your personal and professional life than really anything else. Working and getting better and better at it. Always starting with ourselves. Well, let me know what you think. You can send me an email at rem@toppractices.com. Prosperity is the entire focus of Top Practices. Most doctors are struggling with the business of medicine, and those that aren't truly understand that through association with other successful practitioners, they can take their success to the next level or something greater, like prosperity. Prosperity in business is a function of mindset, marketing, and management. And that is our mission at Top Practices. You can find out more about Top Practices, our marketing and management programs for doctors, our workshops, and annual summit at toppractices.com. Until next time, this is Rem Jackson. Smile when you wake up, and then
Have a really great day. Your best day ever. Nothing is more important.